and they stick to those standards. That's definitely a big advantage and something very professional. Any professional organization out there does have such a similar bigger organization that's setting standards. So I think that many consumers out there have no clue even what ACO is and have never heard of ACO. But I always tell my restaurants and catering, whoever has Hashgacha by us, that when they have something about the Hashgacha, they should mention the Hashgacha is an ACO member. And many times people actually ask, what is that? And when they hear what it is, they're actually impressed that there is out there a body of Hashgachas that came together and decided a industry standard, and those that are members of this organization are committing to be following this standard.
I would say something else. I would say not only that, I think something us as being ACO members, something we can work on, even talking to the ACO executives and whatnot. This should be something that's not a behind the scenes industry thing. We should be promoting this to the community. And if the standards are not high enough, let's make the minimum standards even higher. Should be something that we're proud of. Obviously, Pas Yisrael, Chav Yisrael, these are obviously things that you talk to each agency about. We're talking about standards. Approximately how many times people are doing spot inspections, how inspections are done, ingredient lists, etc. ACO is so important. They do other things, obviously. They provide us with information in terms of the liquor committee doing research on those things, but everything comes down to minimum standards. If you don't have a group minimum standards, I think things fall by the wayside. Everyone does their own thing, and there's no one. You can expect the consumer to call every single agency and say and quiz them on their standards, because often a consumer is not. We don't do it to banks. We go to banks. We trust the system. We need to make consumers trust the system. Okay, you have the Muslims have their own banking system. Americans have their own banking system. We want consumers to have trust in the system. So I think having an umbrella organization. I don't know, Zalman, if you want to have any other comments on this Nakuda before we move on.
Yeah, so I think that the major benefit of ACO goes beyond just setting minimum standards, which are in a large part already there, meaning ACO's minimum standards are essentially what the vast majority of Kashrus agencies are already doing, and or beyond them, and not setting, okay, guys.
When you say vast majority, there's 1,300 agencies in the world, over 1,400.
Right, but there's not 1,300 agencies. There's, I think last time Rabbi Wickler's thing said 1,540 something or whatever, but not all of them are ACO members. ACO only has around 100 and something members. The vast majority of them are in the United States. So when I'm talking about the vast majority, I'm talking about the vast majority of American hashgachas in the United States, not in the world, and not necessarily even of ACO members outside of the United States. I'm talking mainly in the United States, maybe Canada as well. But my point is that when it comes to setting the standards of ACO, the vast majority of the time, it's not inventing new things that people are not doing or are not in the process of doing if there are changes to the standards, but it's things that is already the mainstay, and it's just making sure that there's nobody that slips down or somebody that wants to join thinks that they can get away with something that 20 years ago everybody was doing, and then let's just make it clear. So like when ACO standards say that, well, we only for meat there has to be glatt kosher, there is nothing less than glatt, and there has to be bdikas talayim done on some level. It doesn't say what that level has to be, but it has to be done. And you can't just say, oh, we rely on all kinds of different kulas and saying we don't care about bugs whatsoever. And those are just not acceptable. Maybe 30 years ago they were. Today they aren't. So it's a standard to make sure things don't slip. But the point I was trying to get to is that I think the ACO conferences and ACO as a group gives an opportunity for camaraderie that allows for the viability of Kashrus to exist. Because how do we know that Kashrus is as good today as it is and not as it was 30, 40 years ago? Even though to a consumer it might look like it's more in cloaks and daggers and nobody knows what's going on in the back, the Kashrus people do know. And that's only because of something like ACO and the camaraderie that exists. And you have a conversation with another Kashrus professional and you ask him 2.5 things, you can tell right away if does he know what he's talking about or not. And that's something that if you don't have that type of a framework, it goes back to the old archaic system of how do you know it's kosher? Well, because Rabbi so-and-so said so. Who said Rabbi so-and-so is reliable? Well, because he learned with me in yeshiva. So it must be great, right? Because I know him from yeshiva. So therefore everything is good. And I think that that's something that we moved away from. So when people ask, how are not forget about ACO standards, but how do we know that Kashrus is being maintained properly on whatever level it is? Well, that's because one Kashrus agency is looking over the back of the other Kashrus agency, and not because we're out there to get one another, not necessarily because we're out there to get one another, but simply because I want to know that if I get product coming into me to our VAD, coming from Florida under another hashgacha, it's coming from California under another hashgacha, can I accept it or not? Or even if it's something where I know the hashgacha is good, but who said that their exact standards for this product match my standards? But if you don't know what their language is, you don't even know what questions to ask. And then you're just stuck.
I want to segue from what you started discussing about the camaraderie and whatnot. Someone asked the question, how are ACO minimum standards enforced? How are the ACO standards enforced? And it points me out. This really applies to any industry, whether you're in the dairy industry, the baking industry, you're in the construction industry. If you're a professional in that industry, the biggest fraudsters are the biggest professionals. If someone asks me, if I want to make my hashgacha look perfect and everything else, the biggest professionals have can commit the biggest fraud, but it's not about that. That's in every industry. When you talk about enforcement and whatnot, there are mechanisms of enforcement, including an executive committee and when there's issues that are brought to them, there's the deliberations. And obviously in every enforcement type, when someone comes up, someone discovers an issue, you have someone from an executive committee or someone else who's on one of the other committees. There's many other committees in ACO. You have food service, you have liquor, you have a group, what we call our group ones, generically kosher committee. There's so many different committees. So when someone on that committee can find an issue, bring it to the executive committee, and the executive committee can have a deliberation about what to do about said ACO member or whatnot. Now, I can't get into 100% all the nitty gritty because none of us sitting here today are ACO executives. I don't want to overstep and get myself kicked out. Hopefully one day we can have Rabbi Fishbein, the ACO executive director, maybe on here to talk a little bit more about the enforcement and whatnot. It would be a great topic, and maybe even make enforcement more robust, because the more you talk about something, the more you got to deal with it. But what you're saying is the fact that we talk to each other and there's a mechanism of cooperation over here. You're talking to one Kosher agency to another Kosher agency right away. You get a feel for what's going on by another agency. So I think what you mentioned, that outside of the specific ACO minimum standards, there's the fact that we have the interaction with each other. I think is super important as one of the tools of enforcement. Correct?
100%.
Okay. So
just a note, I just want to add something quick. At the same time, just because someone is an ACO member doesn't automatically mean that they're automatically accepted across the board. And even if there is a certain level of enforcement of standards that from ACO side, it's still for ACO to take full achrayus and to say that they fully recommend everything that Hashgacha is doing, and that they'd be on their recommended list is definitely not.
Again, we're talking about a minimum standards over here, not taking achrayus over every nitty gritty, and maybe the minimum standards should be raised. It's a possibility, right. But you talk about in any industry, you go to a restaurant. When they get a grade from the city, they passed their grade. It doesn't mean everything in the restaurant's perfect. Far from it. But someone is checking on something, and I can tell you all the problems with SQF certification and BRC and everything else. We've seen it all. Any cost professional has seen it. But at the end of the day, having a standard, you have all these banks that fail. They're all FDIC insured or FINRA, whatever the methodology you use for it, because somehow they fail. So it's not about taking a price for every nitty gritty, but at some point there was some level of a price taken to say they have been vetted to some extent. I think that's an important thing. They've been vetted to some extent. It's not a complete half developed.
If I could just add to that, I would say that it's important that consumers understand, I think going back to what you, Moshe, what you said before about, in the beginning, I should say, about lists and approve lists or things of that nature. When we're talking about reliable hashgachas, ACO members, not ACO members, when we talk about reliable hashgachas, that doesn't necessarily mean that every single thing that they do is up to your personal standard. It doesn't necessarily mean that everything they do is something that another hashgacha will always accept. I don't think that there's one hashgacha on the face of the earth that has every single one of their products universally accepted. It simply doesn't exist. You can talk about the best hashgachas, or what people consider to be the best hashgachas. There is going to be somebody that says, this particular product, either from this facility, this geographic area, for many, many different reasons, we don't accept this particular product. And therefore, it's not saying that there's not a good hashgacha, and it's not saying that they don't have a good standard either. There's my standard, and then there's their standard. And the most important thing for a consumer is to know what their standards are. If you're living in a community where you're where there's a communal framework to take care of kashrus, and you're a member of that community, you're you're beholden to that derech hapsak or that mahalach of kashrus, then follow whatever your rabbanim say, to whether it's being more machmer or more meko, and you don't really need to care, and you don't need to double check it every time, other than looking out for obvious human error and mistakes. But anytime that somebody's going outside of their comfort zone, their geographic area, taking a different hashgacha from something that they're not used to on a regular basis, and obviously if you're talking about within one hashgacha accepting from another hashgacha, you're always going to have something that doesn't match them. I just want to share one point on that. In Eretz Yisrael, things are somewhat compartmentalized to various different factions and groups and different hashgachas, and shechita is one of the big things. And I'm not going to say which names exactly, but there's certain shechita that's considered to be relatively decent, but it's not, doesn't have the name of being the top in the world. They were trying to improve their name, so they took many different rabbanim to come see the facility. One of them, well-known Paisik, released some kind of statement, or they released in his name, saying that the shechita is good. So I asked somebody that knows him well to find out what the story is. So he said, yeah, I said, it's fine, but I'm a member of this and this community. I only buy that meat. I don't buy anybody else's meat. The shechita is fine. Everything is fine, but it's not my community. So I think that it's important that people understand that, both when you look at what somebody does accept or doesn't accept, and for themselves, you're going out of town, you're going to a different location, you're visiting Eretz Yisrael, you're buying something from a different hechsher that you're not familiar with. It might be a good hechsher, it might be on an approved list, doesn't meet your requirements. Not generically if it's good.
So, yeah. Hey, Zalman, you pointed out the various communities. I think there's another nikud over here that often, someone wants to know, can I eat a certain hashgacha? And if they meet a certain minimum standards, there's a concept is, you live here, you're part of this community, you're part of this kehila, you follow the kehila standards, even if it's not necessarily the standard that you would find in another kehila. And there's a big concept about that, and that's something to keep in mind when you're visiting somewhere. Do you want to consider yourself part of the kehila? Are you following, welcome, where you came from?
Shanagu, yeah.
Welcome, Shanagu, okay? Someone, segueing into another question we just got over here. Someone asked, are restaurants automatically less mehuder? Interesting word, mehuder. We can debate, what does mehadrin mean? the age-old question, than your own home? Or is it the same as relying on the hashgachas for items you buy in the store? There's not one answer to that. And the answer is not automatically less mehuder. It could be more mehuder. I can tell you one thing for sure. In your own home, you have more control over what's going on. Yes, you're buying products with hashgachas, but you can decide which products you want to buy with which hashgachas. You can decide which restaurant you want to go to. So it's simply a matter of, obviously, the less things you buy, the less places you eat, the more control you have. So it's not automatically less mehuder. It's more about controlling what you want. It's more about knowledge is power. So someone wants to be, my Alta Zeta didn't eat anything out of the house in America. What can I say? That's the way they did it. They didn't eat out of the house. They brought their own food. Obviously those days were different. I'm sure there are still, I believe, I even know someone in Lakewood like that, but you don't have that many people who are shechting their own chicken, shechting their own behemoths. I think they exist. Some of those people do exist still.
They exist.
They exist.
There still are some
There's
people that
spinning
won't eat
their
out
own-
of the house.
there are people spinning their own wool tzitzis. I know someone like that. Yeah, not just making their own tzitzis, they're spinning their own wool. So it exists, but you ask, is it automatically more mahuter? Definitely not. It could be the restaurant's more mahuter than your own house. Let's say. It depends on your standards at home. You have more control. That's one thing I can say. You're in your own home, you have more control. You decide what you want, when you want, and how you want. If we don't have any specific questions on that topic, and obviously we can go on and on about minimum standards, what should they be? And that's for Rabbanim to debate. That's for the executive committee and the Rabbanim of the agencies who are part of ACO to debate what are the minimum standards. And obviously we're always trying, in service of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, we're always trying to raise what our minimum to Hashem is. It's not a competition. It's more about Avodas Hashem. I'm going to do one more general Kashrus thing, and I think a lot of people want to hear about Israeli. Recently online, there was a Kashrus ratings chart flying around. Zalman, I'd love for you to comment on that. And I'll start with a little psicha, but first, before that, I want to, you know what? Let's go straight to that. We want to talk about this ratings chart. And I also want to hear from Zalman. You've worked for so many hashgachas. I've worked with you, currently work on projects together. You have it's a very unique position you're in, where you're in the world of the Israeli hashgachas, the American hashgachas. I always see this. Israelis think they know about American hashgachas and they don't. And Americans think they know about Israeli hashgachas and they really don't. You have a unique perspective. Now, just starting that, there's so many hashgachas over there. There's like way more hashgachas in Eretz Yisrael. I think every little community has its own rabbanut, which is its own thing. Someone posted every rabbanut is bad. I took issue with that. I mean, there's a rabbanut in Telston, which I think most people will eat. They give hashgachas pizza to the pizza store there, the falafel over there. I think most people eat the rabbanut in Telston. So it's kind of a misnomer. You have every rabbanut Ezuri, you have every little regional rabbanut, and then you have a little town rabbanut. So to say every single one of them is the same, I don't think is correct. But you'll talk more about it and explain the differences. But just before, I don't want to get into a lashon harafes per se. A lot of people want to hear the juice. How bad is this hashgacha? How bad is that hashgacha? And trust me, I'm sure there's people who have bad things to say about me and bad things to say about him, bad things to say about all of us. That's one way of looking at it. There are famous ones. I'll even mention it by name. It's pretty well known. Some Sefer Petach got himself into trouble with the Rabbanut. Okay, the Rabbanut put out a letter, detailing certain problematic practices and of them. When a hashgacha is that bad, I mean, to be delisted for certain imports or whatnot by the Rabbanut, I think that's pretty much a big deal because a lot gets by the Rabbanut. It's a lot. So when you reach that standard, we can talk about that. The other thing we're going to do is we're not going to go say this hashgacha is bad. Okay, star K. I have a story with my Landau's hashgacha. I have a story with Eid Charedis. I have a story with this one. This is trade. That's trade. Bells. A good. You start getting into that thing. It usually doesn't end well. One thing I will say is there are hashgachas that some people have that have a bad reputation. And I think we can say it again, going down that rabbit hole of bad mouthing that stuff, but we're not. KVH went through, and this Zalman can talk about it, personally. He was responsible for building up a certain level of hiddur by KVH, where it became, acceptable pretty much among B'nai Torah in the U.S. and definitely locally. So there is sometimes a hashgacha ends up lagging, and at some point an improvement is made, and it takes time for people to get used to that. One hashgacha that comes in particular that got a bad rap, and it made vast improvement. No one's ever perfect. You always have things laying down. KF comes to mind. I mean, they were considered untouchable at one point. And, sometimes people make vast improvements. Is it ever perfect? Nothing's ever perfect. None of us are. But you have someone in town, and you talk about. I want to hear from Zalman actually. What does it take for someone in that situation to bring up your hashgacha to a standard where it's acceptable? Because that's harder than starting a hashgacha from scratch. Repairing reputation. Before you answer, in general, like little nuances, without naming the hashgacha, sure we've had stories where we go visit a facility for ourselves or for another hashgacha when we know there's another hashgacha involved, and you want to know this is what caused unsaid hashgacha to get a bad reputation. If I recall correctly, we've personally had a story like that with a certain hashgacha where was being accepted as mahadrin or if I'm not mistaken, where we saw serious problems by cheese production, if I'm remembering it correctly. So if you have incidents like that without specifically naming the hashgacha, but the examples of what caused the hashgacha to develop a bad reputation.
So yeah, it goes back to what I was saying before, where direct exposure, camaraderie, knowing what other people do is really what builds both confidence and creates lack of confidence in various hashgachas. Sometimes it's across the board. Sometimes it's going to be geographically. Sometimes it will be depending on certain industries or certain things that they simply don't care about this particular topic, and therefore they're going to be very makel about it. So like going back, starting with, I'll try to somewhat stay in order. Starting with Eretz Yisrael, the joke that they've been saying in Israel for years has been that the entire Haredi population, for lack of better terminology, all eats Rabbanut. Everybody eats Rabbanut. Moshe eats this Rabbanut because his cousin is the director of the Rabbanut there, and he told him that you can eat it. And Yankel doesn't eat that Rabbanut. He only eats the other Rabbanut because his brother-in-law's sister's cousin is the one that runs it over there. And everybody's chaver chisle. Everybody has a friend, a brother, a cousin, a relative, somebody that is involved in whatever various city it is, and therefore that's all they eat. Or not all they eat. They accept that particular rabbanut. So number one, the thing saying all rabbanuts are not good is just not very accurate. But the main point I'm trying to bring out with that is that and it's not necessarily a good thing. People make decisions based on who they trust, not based on facts. It's not based on who's running a better hashgacha, based on who has better knowledge. It's, I know Moshe, I trust Moshe because either he's part of the same community that I'm part of, went to the same yeshiva I went to, he's a friend of a friend, whatever the reasons are, and that's what builds up their trust, and not necessarily based on fact. Whereas Kashrus in America, for the large part, is built almost entirely on, we see what goes on in other people's hashgachas and other people's facilities with interactions that we have, and we're vetting them based on facts. Is this hashgacha that I feel comfortable based on the questions that they ask when they ask me about my products, and that when based on their answers, when I ask them a question about their products, do I have who to work with? And sometimes the answer is 100%. Sometimes it's 90%. Sometimes it's only for certain types of things, but not for other types of things. And sometimes it's, well, I can work with this and this person in this organization, but not with somebody else because it just doesn't work.
Zalman, if I can interrupt, because this is directly related to what you're saying right now. Someone asked over here on the meeting chat, how do Rabbanim, how does a Rav who's not a Kosher professional or even another Kosher professional, how do they vet another agency? And this, I would love to hear as much detail as possible, because some of these questions, and I'll talk about it soon, what I expect someone to ask me about, like, our restaurant open on Shabbos, what questions people should be asking me. I would love to hear, I'll talk about that, but I would love to hear from you, because this is something that I know you're very good at, vetting another agency. I ask you these a lot of times, so I'd love to hear from you. How do you vet another Kosher agency? And in as much detail as possible, because there's no lashon hara here.
So if you're starting from scratch, it's very hard. It's not that easy. Like I said, in America, it's a lot easier because there's more overlapping. In Europe, there's, even though the EU is sort of one commercial zone, it's not. And things are not available in one country that are available in one country that are available in another. Whereas in the United States, there is almost everything's available everywhere in the country. It's a little harder maybe to get things in one place, but it's readily available. Interstate commerce is much easier. It's more like trying to work America versus Canada or Mexico. When you're going across from France, northern France to Belgium, which is a short drive away. So vetting in America is slightly different than it is in other places. But obviously, the more information that you have about that, about another hashgacha that you're trying to understand and see, is it something that's appropriate for your community as a rabbi of a community? That's
Okay.
the more information that you have about them. What are their standards? Who are the rabbanim that are running it? What are other?
When you're asking who the rabbanim are, what are we looking for? Obviously, if they're reform conservative, whatnot, what are we looking for? That's a fairly basic question.
Great question. So I'm not looking to see if they're reform or conservative, or if that's obviously a disqualifier, right?
Yeah.
But I don't care where they went to yeshiva and how big of a Talmud Chacham they are either. The real question is, do they understand an Inyan, and do they understand Kashrus? So you can have rabbanim that are massive Talmid Chachamim, but they don't know a thing and a half about the reality of how Kashrus works. So just to use an example within the field of shchita, I heard this story from a friend of mine a few years ago. He said that he was in one shchita team in South America for meat that was coming to the United States. And there was another shchita team that was going back at the same time. So he spoke with the head of that shchita team. And he was asking him, regular shachtim talk. How much glat did you get? What the percentages were? Did you have any bad days? And then, of course, they ended up with, okay, so how many ton of meat did you make? Or how many containers? That's how they measure it by when they're sending full shipments to Israel. So he said, let's say 6 containers. Great. They finish the conversation. He turns around, picks up his cell phone, and calls the plant manager of that facility the guy was in. And he says, Carlos, los amigos, tell me, how many containers you sent for the Rabino? He said, 12. But the guy told him they made only 6. So you can have a great person that he's an expert sheikhet, he's an expert baidik, he's an expert in whatever it has to do, but how do you make sure that what you're getting is what you think you got? Right. So somebody being a big Talmid Chacham and understanding how to pass on a halachic question doesn't mean that how he evaluates the metzias, the reality, is going to match at least what is conventionally considered as acceptable. And you have that with many, many things. Pesach's coming up. People want a kasher. So what's considered libun chamer? What's considered libun kal? Is a self-cleaning oven good enough? Last year, I live in Eretz Yisrael in Harnof. Rabbi Reuben, better known as the Mechaber of Aruch Shabbos, he wrote together an article in a journal that his community puts out once or twice a year, and he literally took apart self-cleaning ovens. Every issue has like 16, 17 different points that people don't think about. They're just, oh, well, I turned on my oven, I cranked it up, it went up to 500 degrees Celsius or 1,000 degrees Fahrenheit. So it's kashered, right? Well, not necessarily. Again, there's a lot of different details that get into that. Does that work or not? But on the point I'm trying to bring out is you can have one rabbi that says, well, I turned on the oven to self-cleaning to 500 degrees Celsius, 900, 1,000 Fahrenheit, whatever the exact number is. And so therefore that's libun chamer. And then you have another rabbi that says, who says that's libun chamer? Maybe I only need to get 371 or 750 degrees Celsius. And then you have some people that think that 300 is enough, or even less than 300 Celsius. I'm not talking Fahrenheit. Fahrenheit, you're talking about the 500, 450, 500. And there are people that think that that's libun chamer. Well, based on what? What's the metzias? What's creating that evaluation? So a person might be a massive Talmid Chacham. It doesn't necessarily mean that his opinion is conventionally accepted. So obviously, if you're a Talmud of that particular rabbi, I'll give you another example. Do we kasher with steam or not? Most kashrus agencies don't kasher with steam. Most of the poskim say you can't kasher with steam. It's not considered agala. The Aruch HaShulchan says it is, right? So it's a non-conventional perspective. It's something that I might understand, I might agree with, I might think that's ikar din, that's halacha, right? That's not conventional. So when you come across a kashrus agency that in conversation, they're like, oh yeah, we do X, Y, and Z. And I'm like, you do what? Oh, okay.
One second. I want to stop you right there. Okay. You said we do X, Y, Z. That's very vague. I want to ask you some specific, not about a specific agency, but specific questions. One of the things that comes up a lot is milchik products from Europe. There's, growing up, I'm a cheese lover. Give me 5-year aged cheddar from Vermont. We actually have a client that does that. I'm in heaven.
The good stuff.
The good stuff. The Parmesan with cheddar notes, or the brie from France, and you have a lot of cheeses coming from Europe, also all over the U.S. And that everyone knows about Gvina Saka. Gvina Saka, and we've at ACO conferences, we've had beautiful presentations, especially from Rabbi Goodnick from Australia. Always love to hear him talk. Especially, he's always love to hear him talk. But you have cheese coming from all over Europe. Is it a good hashgacha? Is it not a good hashgacha? It's got to be called Yisrael. It's got to be Gvinas Yisrael. But those are the basics. What does it take to make it? If you were vetting a cheese product, I want to ask you, where would you start? You're getting a cheese product. Take an example of a cheese that you're going to vet. What would you start asking from the chaliva through the package?
So again, for a consumer, it's very hard to do that. But as a kashrus agency,
We want to hear from a kashrus agency.
Right. So if a kashrus agency,
calls you, can we accept this?
Right. If a kashrus agency is trying to vet a cheese that is either not something that they conventionally would accept, or something that they would accept, but they want to hold to a higher standard and make sure that they're vetting things properly on an individual basis, then you're starting from the actual milking parlors themselves. How many milking parlors are there? Are there any cows that are operated on? Are they removed? Are they not removed? Is it possible? How many mashgichim are there on the team for the chaliva? Right? Is it feasibly possible to do what people say they're doing? Right? And then, okay, what are they doing? How are they establishing Chalav Yisrael? Are they doing it with somebody visiting just once? Are they doing, there's a shita that people don't always refer to by name. There's Kanarin, the Darkachuv, I don't think brings him down by name, but there was in Europe, there was a one of the literature that permitted to have one guy sitting in the center of the village, and then there's all kinds of different milking parlors around in the town, and said, well, that's Chalav Yisrael. And even though the mashgiach's not showing up more than once a week in each facility, in each place where they're milking, and they're milking obviously twice a day at least, right? Is that something we would call Chalav Yisrael? No, absolutely not. Are there people that are calling Chalav Yisrael something of that nature? Yes, unfortunately there are, and maybe even worse than that. So
we get our milk. We get our milk, and we safely. Okay, we have to worry about coverage now as well.
So right. usually in a dairy, when it comes to making cheese, there doesn't necessarily have to be a coverage issue. There are some things that you're more likely to have that issue, but usually with dairies, you can time it in a good sequence that will allow you to do. Like, for example, I recently vetted a certain cheese operation or a product that has a cheese in it for a certain hashgacha, and and one of the things that I asked the person that's running it was about kavash. So it was very simple. We're simply taking milk from the night and in the morning, and as soon as the second milk is done in the morning, it goes straight into the tanker and we go straight to the facility. So no more than 12 hours passes, and 3 hours later it's in the facility. So no kavash issue. So
this is something we're familiar with, very familiar with. Yeah.
So this is something that
but there could be a kavash issue if it's not planned right. There could be.
And there could be a kavash issue.
Yes. Let's work. Moving on. Milk arrives, so we're not going to kasher the storage tanks because hopefully we don't have a kavash issue. We're going to make sure they're clean. Okay.
Except that can sometimes be a mistake. And I was once involved years and years ago. I was involved with in a production where there were two different hamish hashgachas that were doing things back to back, and the first one that was a little bit more holier. Obviously, that's why they went first. They didn't bother to kasher the storage tanks, and they didn't bother to tell anybody that stuff was when things went in. And the next day, when my mashgiach shows up, he says, "What do I do? I have a problem here with kavush." Right? And we call up the other guy and say, "Oh, my Rabbi Moshe didn't tell me any problem about kavush. I don't know about this problem. Never heard of it."
Okay.
Right? So it usually, whenever you're going to end up in a scenario where you might maybe have a problem with kavush, you're always going to want to either kasher just in case, or set, like you said earlier, a double control system, a double precaution to make sure that you never even end up there. And once you reach 18 hours or 20 hours that something's in a tank, for whatever reason it is, automatically the policy is after 18 hours, we start moving it into a different tank.
Or pump it out and pump it back in.
Yeah.
Okay. But now we move on. The milk is either being pasteurized or it's a raw cheese. So pasteurizer you got to deal with. You got to kasher the pasteurizer.
Not just kasher the pasteurizer. Then you have to deal with it. Then you have to deal with the steam in the kettle and their steam system. Is it on a loop? Is it not on a loop? Are you dumping it? You kashering it? You're being pagum it? What are you doing? Right.
That's all part of that. And the guy says you kasher the pasteurize, and you ask him, "Did you kasher the balance tank?" He says, "What's a balance tank?" You got
or a pressure valve.
Or a pressure valve, and he says, "What's that?" Yeah. Okay.
Never heard of it.
But now we're kashering a cheese vat, or sometimes, and I'm more familiar with small ones, but I'm sure you've seen huge places in Europe.
Yeah.
Right. So how does he kasher it? What's the material? What's it made out of? Is it an underground, overground?
There are some places where there is no easy solution for kashering. There's some places where they have, again, this is further down the line, but they have brine tanks that are made out of cement, and there's nothing to do. Right. So you either the only solutions that to do if you want to do a kosher production is to do something portable, liners of some kind.
The liners rip.
So there are people that will do 2 liners, 3 liners.
Swimming pool liners.
Yeah.
Okay. And then you find out that a hashgacha is using the same brine thing, and sometimes the same brine.
Yeah.
Kosher and non-kosher cheese. And these are all red flags, and these are examples of stuff that has ended up in Eretz Yisrael as mahadrin.
Yeah.
If I'm not mistaken. And people say, "Oh, this comes back to another pet peeve. It's just milchiks." It's they're abandonen in this case, Okay.
Well, the thing about just milchiks is an even funnier perspective, because usually when people are saying it's just milchiks, they're talking about eating out in a restaurant, and the reality is that in a fleshig restaurant, both the hashgachas tend to be a little bit more on top of things.
Hold on, I'm gonna that's about you and Nissan, because that pertains to a lot of us, especially out of town places, milk restaurants, fleshig restaurants, and hashgacha tamidus and whatnot. Okay. This, without getting into the nitty-gritty of which, I'm just curious, you have a ratings chart floating around. Is it helpful? Is it not helpful? Accuracy, obviously no one's ever going to agree on accuracy, because it's all a reflection of our own personal involvement with the various interactions with the various agencies on it. But you take a hashgacha like Rav Landau, it's almost universal consensus that it's going to be considered one of the best hashgachas, or the best hashgacha, the strictest hashgacha in the world. Is that correct?
Yes and no. Meaning, yes, like I said before, there's nobody that is universally going to be accepted across the board. And I'll just use the top 2 things that are on this most recent list of hashgachas that's been floating around. Both Rav Landau and the Eida Charedis are generally considered to be probably the best hashgachas in the world. Whether that's 100% accurate or not is irrelevant, but that's how people look at it as. And both of them have a fallacy that some people won't eat products from either one or the other. One, the Eida Charedis' shchita for years was, I wouldn't call it subpar, but they had different kulas on different things that from years and years ago that they never changed. And supposedly now they have changed them. It is true, isn't until today there are many people that just won't eat Eida Charedis meat and chicken because of that, right?
Right.
Rav Landau, on the other hand, is shchita is probably the most strictest thing that exists in the world, from what it sounds like. Though there are nuances even on that. But when it comes to bug checking and infestation issues, at least in Eretz Yisrael, he does not have a stellar reputation on that regard. So there are people that will eat Rav Landau's things, everything Rav Landau, except when it comes to things that have leafy greens or vegetables or broccoli or whatever. They just won't touch it, right? So, and here you're talking about 2 hashgachas that are considered the top. So how does that work? So going back to your real question, how helpful are the lists? From my perspective, at least, I think that a list, the second you have too many exceptions to a list, and I'll use a practical example from a restaurant in a second, then the list does not help. So if you have hashgacha that you could tell people, this hashgacha is good, generally reliable, you don't have to think twice about it. Great, put that on a list. But the second you're starting to say, well, this is second, this is a third, this is a, one second, how do I make a decision when it's good to eat a second and when to eat a third? You're relying on something that doesn't know anything about kashrus to know what fits and what doesn't fit and when they're going to decide yes, and when they're going to decide no. And so, just to use an example from the hashgacha side itself, I went once to a restaurant here in Israel to review it, and which is under, I don't remember if it's on the second layer or the third layer of this list that was going around, but it's something that many people eat. Turns out most of the staff there are from people in this place to begin with, so I just want to put that within perspective. But there's supposed to be a mashgiach there every day. I don't know if the entire time and most of the time, the mashgiach hadn't been there for 3 weeks. He had moved to a different town. They still haven't found a replacement. Supposedly, the supervisor in the area, it was supposed to be popping in there every single day. Did happen, didn't happen, I don't know. That's not the real issue. The real issue is, okay, this hashgacha only allows products from A, B, C, D hashgachas, right? Great. So I'm walking around and I see one exception. I say, well, 1 second, why is this here? Oh, the supervisor approved it. Okay. What about this one? Same thing. At what number, Nissan, what number do you think I stopped counting?
3.
What?
The three exceptions?
No. You're being way too machmir. I stopped at 50.
50.
50,
Wow.
50.
What you're saying now is a wonderful example. I mean, it's bad, but when you first mentioned that there was a hole, there was Shemitah Torah mitzvahs on site, but the mashgiach moved. Said a lot of hashgachas, you have an anomaly that falls through the cracks. But what you're pointing out over here is, okay, I talked to hashgacha, there was an anomaly. Let's ask some more questions. You're talking 50 exceptions. That's
And I would say it's even more than that. If you have 50 exceptions and you have it documented in some kind of way, there's a chart, there's a list that says these 50 things are accepted. Okay, I'm willing to accept that, but there's no way, no traceability whatsoever. There's no way to verify that it's not 50 and not 35.
Wow, traceability. You just talk about traceability and policies. You might remember this. We talked about this. I was invited on one of my trips there to Israel. You may recall I was invited. Someone wanted me to come check out some restaurants.
Right.
And one of the things that you were still at, I can't say, listen, I know I have your former position. One of the things, you were a master at written policies, written documents. You had a written document for everything, and we continue it. We continue to build on that. It's amazing. And this particular place, it looked pretty good. And it was a milchik restaurant, but obviously you have Tailam, you have Bishla Akum, and then you have products come in. What are you accepting? It's like, there was like one page with like 7 bullet points. It wasn't clear where the list of accepted hashgachas were. So I sit there with the owners and the Rav Machsher, one of the Rabbanim Moshe. We talked. I said, it's pretty good. I like it. I would eat here. It looks good. I would be comfortable. They said, the Rav with me he says, what's missing? Give it to me. Give it to me straight. And the owners are there. 2 owners. I said, it's interesting to me. We have contracts with our clients, and obviously things fall through the cracks. You forgot to update it, whatever it is. But we have contracts, and we have written policies. We have what we call kitchen policies, catering policies, Shabbos policies, fish and meat policies, induction burner policies, and on and on and on and on, policies and policies. And yes, you have to sit and go through it, because if you hand someone, I just literally today, potential new caterer, handed him like a stack of policies. I said, I'm going to go through with you after Pesach, every single one. So feel free to read it. And the response was very Israeli. It was like, we'd rather not have anything in writing. You talk about accountability and traceability.
Like, doesn't exist.
7 bullet points. We don't want anything in writing.
Yep.
Yeah. So that's it's an important point you're making about accountability and traceability. I like what you said about, in terms of researching, you start asking about one, and not everyone can ask, but the point you make is you have a list like this. It has 4 tiers. I think maybe it has 5 tiers now. And I understand that there are certain base things. Hashgacha is not acceptable. So accepting Gvinas Akum, or, it's not, in America, we have hashgachas that are accepting Gvinas Akum that are officially Orthodox. They allow, non-kosher gelatin that not from non-shchutas is considered usher.
Right.
Okay. We want to debate the halachic fine points of it. Fine. But the bottom line is that the consumer expects it to be usher. You have a guy who's accepting gelatin from Trefus, some from the Veils, and some from Timaeus, by the way. Some of the substandard hashgachas. Obviously, there's nothing to contend with, so it's easy. Black them out. But then you have other people. It's like, there's just no policies in place. There's no training in place. There's no nothing in place. So at some point, you have those hashgachas move down. But when you start to getting, this is fairly good. This one's good. This is very good. This is excellent minus. This was excellent plus. It becomes confusing and it becomes super subjective. The finer you break it down, the more subjective it gets. And is that helpful to your average consumer? I think I'd say not. We compare it to
100%.
ACO. Maybe we should boost the ACO minimum standards to, fine tune them and whatnot. But having a base thing, you have specific questions. Talk to your Rav. And we had one time a beautiful email from a local person. She wrote me an email with questions. I spoke to my Rav and he said, "This is what I should ask you." And I wrote her back, point blow by blow by blow. She sent to my Rav.
Yep.
My Rav's answers are very satisfactory. Thank you. I was very impressed. You came to me. This is what my Rav said I should have. This was someone who said, consumer could say, "I accept it because this is a generally accepted hashgacha," or fine. But the way they came about it, consumer can ask. But to have a list with, I would understand if you had a list of non-acceptable hashgachas. And in fact, we give our clients because we want them to understand. I can't answer again and again and again. We're not accepting tablet K cheese or KORC cheese, KRC from California. There's only so many times I can answer the question. So you obviously put together some sort of list like that. And then there are other hashgachas. I tell them that there's going to be times where there's hashgacha you're going to ask, but it's not on the approved list. It's not on the banned list. And sometimes I have to research product by product. It's going to happen by and large, especially sometimes it's more obscure hashgachas from South America or from Europe or from the Far East that we just, you need to talk to people. They're much smaller. Okay. We could talk more and more. We could give a 2-hour share just on cheese and the intricacies, but we're going to have to move on. We set it for an hour. I know someone asked, why don't they write plastic packages? I'll get to that soon myself. There's reasons for it. Personally, they're not good reasons. A lot of them are company reasons that they're not interested. I'll give one, going on a tangent just to answer that question. Sometimes the company doesn't want to write extra words. The other thing is sometimes plastic devices can be finicky, and I don't want to end up with a recall. So right now, what we're working on is I would love to even put the hashgacha in the date code, the symbol in there. That way, when there's a recall, it's the easiest thing to take off.
100%.
In the date code, you can take it off right away. So right now we're working with our companies who do plastic to put PY or plastic in the date code. One of them says they started doing it. I didn't see it rolled out yet, but we're working with one of our big bakeries. A lot bread goes all over the Eastern Seaboard out to Pennsylvania to put plastic or PY in the date code. So why wouldn't a company want to write something? I'll give an example. We had a company that was writing KVH D. They were putting a D on orange juice. Why? Because they don't even want to put a D. It's enough. We have to put a kosher symbol. It's clean. It's neat. They don't even want to put a D. LMI. It's dairy equipment. You got to put it on there. You can't cook your chicken in the orange juice. Your citrus in your chicken. You can't do that, right? For Ashkenazim. But they don't want to. Now, you're making me write DE? No, we'll just write D. So now I end up with stupid questions. Why in the world is there a date on your orange juice? So a lot of times it's silly company policies, and it's not a cautious concern, so we don't fight it. Maybe we should. Other things, we do have quite a few questions coming in. Differences in terms of nuances between understanding, a lot of times people say, "Oh, in Eretz Yisrael, hashgacha is so complicated. I wish it was like the U.S." Where we have, the CRC list, and I have pet peeves on the CRC. Don't get me wrong. I respect Rabbi Fishman a lot. I respect the CRC. We work with them on things. Everyone's going to have their personal thing. I say, "Oh, why'd you put that hashgacha on? Why'd you put this?" You're always going to have that. But at the end of the day, someone knows it was vetted in some fashion. Whatever it was, it's there. And if someone wants, like we said before, to ask questions, talk to a Kashrus professional about what to ask privately. You don't have to walk around and say, "Oh, Kaufman said this hashgacha is really treif, and it's on the CRC list." There's no need to do that. There's absolutely no need to do that. But someone who wants to know, let them do it. They can do it privately. There's ways of doing it. And I think you give examples of certain questions to ask. We'll talk about restaurants, but I think restaurants really come down to. I want Nissan to talk about that a little bit. Zalman will talk about that. Someone asked, "Are caterers governed by by any kosher standards or organizations?" I'm not clear what the question was as opposed to what. We have so many written policies, and ACO does have standards for food, what's known as food service, which includes restaurants, caterers, food trucks, etc. There are policies for it, and I can say that's probably one of the things that's most closely collaborated on. Would you agree with that, Nissan? Food service?
Right, yes, definitely.
It's so closely collaborated on in that case. I think Zalman would agree. We talk about it so much, and honestly, I look at it myself. I give one rabbinical coordinator, I give one Rav 100, 200 companies. That's the equivalent of 30 to 40 to 50 company to food service accounts, the agamas nefesh that you get from it. You know, the amount of work that goes into it and the issues you have. And I'm sorry.
I once heard from a different kashrus agency that they said that the RCs were complaining why they're sitting by executive meetings, all the different coordinators in the office, and they're talking about 90% of the time they're talking about food service problems when 90% of the coordinators are only dealing with industrial things.
That happened here in the KVH office not 3 weeks ago, a Monday morning meeting.
Yeah.
That happened. Everyone's like, Rabbi Zalman tells me, you need me here?
Why am I here?
What am I doing here? You know, Rabbi Zalman asked, what am I doing here? You know?
But I think it's actually there's an important point to point out. Years ago, I had before I was in Boston, I was in Portland, Oregon. We had in the bakery over there, in an in-store bakery, the mashgiach tells me one day that they baked dairy bread. I'm like, dairy bread? How did they even get dairy bread? Well, I come in and it has hashgacha on it. Dairy bread, hashgacha, frozen, wasn't baked yet. So I'm like, whatever. We dealt with however we dealt with the problem. Then I call up the rabbi and the hashgacha that was certifying it. And I said, Rabbi, what's going on? He said, well, it says butterflake roll on it. I was told it's like a cupcake. I said, Rabbi, did you see a picture of this product? He said, no, can you send me a picture? And I'm like, when the people that are in dealing with industrial kashrus don't understand how things end up on the retail side, then they're just creating problems. Yes. So it's very important for the industrial side of kashrus and the food service side of kashrus to be in sync and integrated and to understand each other's problems, limitations, difficulties, and how to address them in a way that works for both
Right.
parts of the spectrum.
I'll jump in on that. You know, we had a similar story. We had this Trader Joe's kind of went viral. Trader Joe's cinnamon roll bread, and it was certified KVH. It had a D on it. It had butter in it, and it had a D on it. Next thing we never approved it, so it wasn't in our system. So people looked it up, and right away we were getting it unauthorized. So and taco was unauthorized. We never authorized it. But then take a step back. I went out Trader Joe's. I bought a roll of it, and I smelled it. And it's not chalav yisrael, so I can't taste it. I have a neighbor who could. I don't know if that's being machshel or not. I smell it, and it's got raisins and it had at that point. I don't recall if it had nuts, but definitely had raisins inside and like a glaze inside, almost like a babka kind of thing. And I smell it and touching it, I'm like, this is not bread. This is like calling cornbread bread. This is cake. I asked them to taste it. I said, they're like, well, yeah, some people use this as bread, like for French toast and whatnot, but yeah, it's like a cake kind of. So you realize that sometimes mistakes happen. You change things. In the end, they took the word bread off of it and they called it. I think they took the word bread. I got to double check that, but they called it cinnamon roll. So sometimes things maybe are not as bad as you think they are or whatnot. So it was the opposite of what you kind of the opposite of what you're talking about. It's important to, you know, we had one of our industrial mashgichim went out and bought it. And he was the first one to tell me, he's like, I don't think it's bread. You know, wrong wording, but you know, maybe, but I don't think it's bread. But let's talk a little bit about. I want to Nissan. You're talking about setting up a restaurant, a caterer. How does someone understand? And I'm going to talk about my own experience, but tell me from your experiences. You got to set up mashgichim. You got to train mashgichim. We talked about you have the ACO course. I can tell you, I think the Hamanam, I would love for them to know about it because Rabbi Nosson Dubin did a wonderful job introducing people. And this is not the end all. You take his online course, it's kind of like a ServSafe course or whatnot, any online course, it's not the end all, trust me. This does not make you a mashgiach expert, but it makes sure you have the foundations in kashrus. And you'd be surprised how many people even grew up from and missing certain foundations. Maybe we do a lousy job teaching in schools, probably. But there's certain foundations that we just expect people to grow up with, and sometimes things fall by the wayside. And Nissan has done a wonderful job on his Kosher Institute of America. Bad acronym, KIA, really, really bad. But it's a wonderful tool, and he has all sorts of courses. Something I worked with him on is, I suggested, and we use it for clients. He even has one for secular people or non-Jewish people, employees in a kosher food service setting. We've used this at universities. So it's wonderful tools he has over there. And they created an ACO Mashgiach training course. There's a generic one, and then he collaborated with so many agencies to customize it for what they wanted. There's a KVH one, there's a this one, every Ashgacha is using a customized version, but there's also the generic one. There's one for homeowners. There's so many tools out there, but that's just the basics. You get the basic training. I mean, you'll talk about that. You got to train the guy. There's so much to do. Can you tell us a little bit about, first of all, setting up a new store? I know you set up a recent one in Tampa, which is Zalman, wonderful news, because I believe you traveled to Tampa. I traveled to Tampa. We have company. We have now at least one company. I think two. Gotta look it up. We have companies in the area. Go down there, and it was a desert. It was a kosher desert down there. I know there's a Hamish community down there, I think south of Tampa. Nissan has a Galat kosher restaurant that he certifies over there with the local Rabbanim. So you set up a new restaurant. What is involved in setting up a new restaurant? Mashgiach, ownership, documents, and keep it running. Tell us a little what's involved.
Right, so obviously we'll start with, since you mentioned the Mashgiach course, which is a tremendous resource, but like you mentioned, it is only very basic, and at the same time, it could be a little bit, how do you say, not always the most, so people are taking it more just to take the test and to pass, and sometimes information doesn't stay with them in a practical way. And what I always try to do is, besides obviously that, is to sit down with the mashgichim and to go over a whole bunch of other pointers, and then to go with them into the restaurants and to discuss with them hands-on. Okay, here's the ovens, here's the stoves. Let's talk about Bishul Yisrael and explain each situation, whatever was discussed in the course, whether if it's relying on pilots, not relying on pilots, the doors of the oven opening, if it was overridden or not. And obviously, each thing could be a whole discussion for itself, and we could spend a lot more time. But we go through each and every single step of what a mashgiach needs to know, but hands-on, and explain to him what would be the right way, what would be the wrong way, and if we're trying to be makbid in this area, whatever it is. If a consumer asks for Bishul B'Yosef, Yosef, what does that mean? And to really, really go everything hands-on. So it's a hands-on experience. It's not just an abstract course online that you're taking and then taking a test, but you actually really get hands-on learning. In addition, I also have the mashgichim. I personally have a whole list of classes which are also available on the website kashrusbeingtheknow.com. General information, which are go a little more in depth on many subjects, fish, bug checking, and whatever, many other subjects. I give it to them, and afterwards I do review it with them, ask questions on it. And on top of that, there is a thorough b'dikas talaim, hands-on training, which is very important. It's impossible really to learn how to recognize a bug or to check without the hands-on. You can watch all videos from today to tomorrow. You really need hands-on, someone pointing out and showing you what to do, what you're looking for, and that's always a great moment. You see, light up in their eyes when they suddenly start noticing what they looked over, the first few times. Suddenly they start noticing it. It's a tremendous. It's always a tremendous turning point for many of them. They say afterwards they can never eat anywhere else again because they suddenly realize really what it could be in the produce and how it looks like. How many people that didn't go through some basic training won't even know. And that's just in the training aspect. But then there's finding a mashgiach. Here in Orlando, where I'm based, or in Tampa, finding a mashgiach is definitely extremely difficult. So we always tell restaurants or catering before they even want to start talking about seriously opening, we first have to have a mashgiach perspectives, or few perspectives in place. If not, it's not realistic to even start get certification. In such a place, we require a mashgiach committee for all of our establishments, and therefore finding mashgiach obviously is first. Now, next thing is setting the place up. It depends if you're coming to an existing kitchen and to a place which is going to be they're making it into a kitchen. Obviously, if they're going to be making an empty space into a kitchen, it's much easier from the start. You can tell them what to buy and how to set it up and what to do. This is a little more flexible. If you're coming to a place that was already pretty much set up, you go through from the door all the way to the back to whatever space there is. Go through each and every single item, whether if it's an item that it was used in the past, and if it could be koshered, how it's going to be koshered, letting them know the process. They're going to know what could happen when there's koshering. Sometimes it could just, some things get a little bit change color, whatever it is. Go through really each and every single item, what's going to have to be done. Some items we're not going to be able to kosher. We're going to have to get this new, and then try to apply whatever is in place. If it's an oven that we see as a convection oven that that turns off when the door is open, we let them know that in such a case we need to override it, and they have to get the technician to do it, or if not, we can try to figure it out. And that's for, let's say, Bishul Yisrael. And if it's if they're going to be doing fish and meat, then they're going to have grilled fish and grilled meat on their menu. We have to figure out how are they doing it, and if they're planning on using the same grill, I mean that can be very complicated, and we strongly discourage it. If they still insist, then we have a method to do it. We have a guy which knows how to build literally a metal wall in the middle of the grill, and we take one grill out and it separates the grill into two. Obviously, we have a way to go about, but it was just another thing. Separation of fish and meat could happen in the busy kitchen. Is very hard to control. So we will, have areas that whenever fish is dealt with, it should be on this counter. We have protocols that we put on the walls. Whoever's dealing with fish needs to change their gloves, or if they don't have gloves, needs to wash their hands. And we really go through every single thing that we have to have, obviously very important. The mashgiach has to have ample space to wash and check vegetables and check and have space to put his light box and his shmatas and his colanders and his soap, and space to put his buckets down, and space to put, whatever. He needs a decent amount of space to work, and as well proper lighting besides for the light box.
I just want to interrupt on a couple of these notes you're making. When someone asks about vetting other hashgachas, in food service, it seems to be, expert in food service. This was my miktsaya as well at some point, or Zalman was very involved. These are questions. You talk about asking someone, where does the mashgiach work? Well, he doesn't really have space to work. How does he wash produce? Well, sort of, we figure it out. They didn't even realize the ovens go off when you open the door. Convection is, they did realize, but they didn't realize the problem. These are so many things that, someone asks, how do you vet? Asking these types of questions and not getting clear answers from a Rav Machsher. These are clear examples of how to vet a food service hashgacha that you're giving right now. You ask someone about a fryer. The guy says, I separate meat and fish. They never fry meat in the fryer. They only fry fish. Oh, and French fries.
Or getting answers that don't match reality. Right. I was once doing a walkthrough with somebody, and he's telling me their policy about a certain bug checking thing, and in front of our eyes while we're walking through, they're doing it differently. Like we're standing there,
right?
And you're telling me,
from this, I want to let you continue, but I'll segue into another nikuda about setting. I think you've given the Olam Hacham of the intricacies of setting up. We'll talk about mashgiach training in a second. I think Zalman, what you just pointed out, maybe that is their policy. One of the things I pointed out that we're going to talk about is mashgiach training, to me, this and whatnot. If you train a mashgiach and there's no oversight, the training is worthless. And this is talking about training mashgiach. You do the ACO course. It's nice. It's an important thing, and you can't get past it. That's the starting point. Then you train the mashgiach, and then what? Then you walk away. How often are you following up and checking up on the mashgiach? And I think this is crucial nakuda of how not just a mashgiach has a checklist. I mean, we're Zeicher Zalman spent a lot of money, and we've spent since then a lot more money building our Kashrus database and management software. And we don't just use it for our industrial ingredient management, company management. We use it for food service. Our mashgichim, which was like most of them are paid by us. That was something that people called you, Zalman, crazy for doing. We still kept most of it in place. I don't know if you did it or it was just like that. There's a lot of miles to it. There's financial constraints, don't get me wrong. But there's a certain amount of control you have. But also, mashgichim can't get paid without putting in reports because it's part and parcel. They have to put their hours in. They can't submit hours without answering questions. That's very nice. Are you checking to make sure those questions are matching reality? Mashgiach says yes, 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 and you can't leave him blank. He has to say yes or no or other, and he has to write 40 characters, whatever it is. So the guy says, I do this, I do this, I do this, and then you check up on him and it doesn't match reality, like Zalman said, you got a problem. So are you waiting for someone else to catch you? Or does the Hashgacha have a system in place of checking on the mashgichim? Do they have supplies they need? And so on and so forth. So people want to know, again, in food service, how kashrus scandals happen. I think some of it can be attributed. There was a mashgiach tamidi. How was there a kashrus scandal? How much oversight on the mashgiach there was? And I'll tell you this, no matter what, there can always be a scandal. There can always be mistakes. And someone can always cheat. The question is how fast you're going to catch the cheater. How on the ball is the mashgiach going to be? I think a lot of this has to do with us as kashrus administrators. How on top of our mashgichim are we? Can have the best training. If you're not on top of your mashgichim, if you don't walk in there, my mashgichim who do the oversight, they have slightly necessarily they could have different questions on their digital formats to answer than the mashgichim who do what we call tamidus work. When you're doing an administrative review, there's different questions than when you're doing different ports have different questions. That's something that's super important to make sure you have people in place. It can't always be a kashrus administrator, depending how big you are. You need to have someone besides the mashgiach, someone checking up on him, and someone checking on the checkers. There's always a hierarchy. And then on, someone like myself on top of me, I have a rabbinical board. I mean, I like everything about having a board of directors, but you have a board. You got to answer to someone. You got to answer to someone. So, maybe tell us about how you check up on your mashgichim.
Right. So first of all, again, to reiterate that it's extremely important because naturally, just in human nature, people tend to slack a little bit, get more comfortable in their position, and just naturally, if there isn't someone checking in on you and making you feel accountable, someone will just slowly slack off. And Hashem, no ill intent, but it's just slowly by slowly. That's what happens. So it's extremely important. And personally, the local restaurants in Orlando, I try visiting for sure once a week, optimally twice a week. Again, all our restaurants have a mashgiach committee from open to close, so that's that. But myself, I'm coming in at least once a week. Try to do twice a week. I try doing one of the times. If I'm doing twice a week, one of the times when the restaurant actually is closed, because so many times you can walk in, there's so much going on, the fridges, and you want to see sometimes how operations are done once the day is over. How are things being locked up at the end of the day? Because sometimes we do, let's say, let the restaurant have a cleaning crew come after hours. In such a case, there has to be a lock on the gas. There has to be plug locks locking any equipment that would be used to cook food or warm food. And obviously, the fridges need to be locked. And there's the whole protocol of if anybody's staying after hours with no mashgiach. So I need to see if that's being done properly. And then other small technicalities. If someone's leaving, let's say, onions or garlic that was fully peeled and did not add a significant amount of, let's say, oil or salt, which we require as a shkacha. These are small things, but I'll go through the fridge and I'll mess with mashgiach. This onion doesn't seem like anything was added to it. What's going on? Just stuff like that. So sometimes I do feel like it's important also to visit after hours and to not just during operation. So I try to have a mix of that, and definitely if I'm doing twice a week, I'll do one time during hours, one time after hours. And if I'm only going once a week, then I'll try to just balance it depending on the week. Besides for that, obviously, we do have cameras in every single place, and whenever I have free time, I do scan through the cameras, and there's cameras in the fridges. There's cameras pretty much at all angles. The mashgiach station to see how he's washing, how fast he's washing, if he's just generally going through the protocols, and that as well. I will mention to the mashgiach and to other workers, I did see on the camera this, I did see on the camera that, to instill in them to realize that someone is also checking in, and they don't know how often, but someone is checking cameras as well. So that's personally, in short, how I do it. And in Tampa as well, over there we have, I go in Tampa personally, I try going there once a month or once every month and a half, but there is the two local Rabbanim there, Rabbi Rivkin and Rabbi Dabrowski, which each go there at least once a week. Sometimes each one of them goes there twice a week. So we have at least 3-4 visits coming in and going through everything and speaking to the mashgiach and thoroughly looking over everything that's being done.
Okay, so we talked about this, and obviously, like we said before, each thing we could talk about its own share and its own webinar of each thing. We do have to move on. It's already 5:49, past the time we said, and for Zalman, it's basically time to go to sleep. I want to pivot to something home business, home kashrus, and this I want to hear both from all of us. I want to hear thoughts on this. Let's start with Zalman, because Eretz Yisrael is rampant. You open up one of these magazines and everything. Everyone's got their own home business, cookies and care packages, and I think it's more prevalent in Eretz Yisrael in the Hamish communities than it is here. I think simply because you have a lot of maybe young couples over there looking for a way to make business, and you have people who want maybe let's call it a taste of home, and they understand it. I don't think it's a unique thing to Eretz Yisrael in terms of how to do the hashgacha on the home business. I think the issues are the same everywhere. And again, mitzad halacha, you go eat by your friend. Obviously, once there's a business involved, you have various other halachic concerns. If you look in the Aruch HaShulchan, there's famous people talk about the Gzeira Haratzos, okay, fine. But even closer to our times, Aruch HaShulchan talks about once someone has a business, even if it was mutter me'ikar adin, they should have hashgacha. They should have a Rav Ha'ir who's checking. And the question is, how easy is it to check on something? And what do we need to check on? Because at the end of the day, whenever you have a Shomer Torah mitzvahs involved, you are relying on the fact that they are a Shomer Torah mitzvahs to some extent. That's the nature of it. You're checking up on them, so you're doing verification. The question is, can you really do hashgacha in someone's home business? There's different types of home businesses. You have home businesses that have private entrances, private rooms, and then there are home businesses where someone's cooking in their home kitchen. You have to walk through their living room sometimes to get their dining room, to get to where their home business is. And how practical is it? Especially uncomfortable. The husband's in Kyle and I got to do my checkup, or she's doing it late at night. And when do you ever check up? Do you just ask her to submit ingredients? These are real complexities. And I'll point out one more nakuda. Let's say someone figures out a good way to certify home businesses, and we can debate if there is or not. Let's say you have a community where it's a very mixed community. I live in a very mixed community. All the way, in Boston, there's even a new concept. There's a non-denominational religious Jews. We don't want to be Orthodox because you can get non-denominational smicha nowadays in Boston. It's not conservative or reform or traditional or whatever. Non-denominational, you got to do whatever. So you have this whole blurred lines. And what are we accepting? What are we not accepting? And sometimes it's just easier to say, we're not certifying home businesses. And everywhere has, every place we certify has a mashgiach. We need independent access. That's one mahalach you have to do sometimes. Something I do want to, I know that Chaim Martin from JSOR and Deal actually created a spin-off hashgacha where they wouldn't certify under the JSOR home businesses, but they created a separate one, I think, they call it home kosher or whatnot. It's an interesting concept. One day we'll do an interview with him. Or Zalman, maybe you can talk about this home businesses, which is rampant in Eretz Yisrael.
Yes, I think you sort of nailed most of the topics already. It's the number one question before you talk directly about home businesses is what constitutes a hashgacha. So without getting to home business, when we say that a certifier is certifying something, what does that mean, right? So some people are familiar with, like you mentioned, the Takonos Vada Dalet Artzos. What the exact lashon, what the exact terminology they use is not really clear. But in most versions of how it's brought down that there needs to be some kind of, if you're selling something, at least wine, cheese, meat, and things that are more kosher sensitive, there has to be some kind of a ksav hechsher, me'ezer rav abad or something like that. It doesn't say any like real rules or any real controls. You just bring a letter saying that it's kosher. So
all ingredients are either charedus.
Right. So I think that it's important for people to understand that when we're talking about hashgacha today, we're not talking about just bringing some kind of letter. We're talking about that there needs to be a control system. There needs to be real oversight and checks and balances to make sure that, meaning the hashgacha is taking responsibility. When people come and complain, oh, how could this happen if the hashgacha gave hashgacha? You can never have that complaint in a home business, because you can never have that type of responsibility and oversight. You can't go, like Rabbi Zibell said before, go in and do an inspection in the middle of the night in somebody's private home, right? Even if they have everything separate. I want to go check up on their ingredient panel in the middle of the night.
By the way, that's when a lot of their stuff takes place.
I know that it takes place, but I'm saying forget about when they're working. But you want to go off hours, whatever the off hours are. It's just not possible to do. You can't.
So essentially, the hashgacha at that point is just trusting them.
Exactly. So the only thing that is possible to do in a home setting, I wouldn't say the only thing. There are some exceptions, like you said. Sometimes it's totally separate. Sometimes it's really organized work. There are scenarios where a home business maybe can exist. right? And it can be certified and supervised. I know I have seen such things. It's not very common. The vast majority of them are simply not certifiable. They can be vetted, they can be educated. And I think that it's important for Rabbanim, whether it's an official hashgacha or not official hashgacha, that Rabbanim, either of the people that are making it, meaning the people that daven in the shul, or if it's a city that has a rav in the city or in the community or whatever it is, that they should make sure that people that are selling things in a home business have some kind of direction and oversight, and make it clear when they need to ask shilas and an address for those shilas. How to then be able to communicate that there is some kind of you can't really call it oversight, but some kind of
Guidance.
vetting process, right? Which is sort of what Rabbi Arking did in Jersey, right? It's a vetting process of some kind. It's not ashgacha. It says pretty clear on the thing that it's not ashgacha, right? They're not really certifying it. They are simply setting up a framework and a system so that the people can know. And I can give examples upon examples. One example that something that's related to me. Had a home business for a while, and my daughter asked her for a recipe of something that they made, and it had mascarpone cheese in it, right? They said, "Oh, I looked all over the stores. I couldn't find mascarpone cheese with hashgacha that is acceptable. Couldn't find it." So I asked where did it come from. Oh, it's this and this brand with this hashgacha. That's nice. No store has it with that hashgacha. So I got in touch with the mashgiach in the factory. Oh, they make it with that hashgacha for retail market only around Shavuos time, right? Industrial, you can get it, but you can't get it retail. So this person was selling products to people, assuming that the hashgachas were on a higher level, but bought a lower level hashgacha because they never bothered checking, because nobody ever taught them about kashrus, and because there's no zero oversight.
There was one case that someone I heard of. The people advertise all ingredients are either charedis. There was one person, some acquaintance, and I asked him, I couldn't have seen what was going on. I said, this oil, is it vetted? She said, the oil also has to be either charedis? I was like, exactly. You're telling me all ingredients are either charedis. Oil is a kosher sensitive product. Is it the most kosher sensitive product?
Or in Israel, when you have places that there are some cities that have set up a higher level of hashgacha within the rabbanot, and they only use, let's say, Edelland, Reuben, whatever top level hashgachas for the ingredients. And then you ask them, well, what about the fruit and vegetables or the wine that they're using?
Someone asked about hashgacha on wine. We'll get there in a second. But it's a good example. Nissan yesterday's pointed out. You're talking about home business also. The panko crumbs also need to be pas Yisrael. You told everyone everything's pas Yisrael. So could hashgacha make this mistake? Yeah, but a professional is less likely to make a mistake. We make mistakes all the time. But we make less mistakes than it's like every professional. You make less mistakes than the people who are not involved. That's the thing. Panko crumbs also have to be pas Yisrael. Yeah. Also panko. We had an event that we had to mix the pas Yisrael certification because what? Panko has to be pas Yisrael.
Yeah.
Okay, maybe someone will debate it and say it doesn't. Okay, we're gonna try to wrap things up soon. I don't know how much longer any of you want to stay around. We'll do this again at a different time, but a couple of things I want to cover. One of them is not on here, and I'm going to ask Rabbi Zalman to talk about it. I have limited experience, first-hand experience. You probably have a little more. Can you talk about hashgacha on wine?
Talk about it a little bit.
Okay, you know what? Let's put it. I think this one has to duck out. So one of the things I just want to cover. We'll come back to the wine in a second. We'll talk about it a little bit. We talked about oversight. I want to talk about something, and I want to hear both from Nissan and from you. Something, it became a pet peeve of mine. People want to know hashgacha tamidus. Is there hashgacha tamidus? What does hashgacha tamidus mean? Is it required? Is it a guy sleep? Someone will say he's a working mashgiach. I want a mashgiach who's not working. So what do you get instead? You get a mashgiach reading in the newspaper or learning a Blat Gemara, which is better, obviously better, or you get a mashgiach who's sleeping.
Yep.
Okay, so a mashgiach tamidi, a non-working mashgiach. Are we good? I'd rather a working mashgiach. Again, there are issues with a working mashgiach. I'll take a working mashgiach any day over a sleeping mashgiach, or a newspaper mashgiach, or even a Blat Gemara mashgiach. That's the reality. That's the reality. I mean, so asking a place all the time, do they have hashgacha tamidus? Is that a standard? What does it help a consumer if we tell them we have hashgacha tamidus? If you got to understand what having a mashgiach tamidi means. And unless you have a great mashgiach, a working mashgiach is the way to go. People are going to quote me on that. This is going to be recorded, and I might get blasted for this. But outside of super mashgiachim, a working mashgiach is the way to go with all the problems that it comes with, both allegiances. And by the way, we have some working mashgiachim who are actually on our payroll, ironically. Weird thing. We pay them, and they help out in the store with specific tasks. It might not be the greatest, but one of the things I noticed, we have a place where a relatively new place. We have two shifts of mashgiachim, both relatively semi-retirees or retirees. And sometimes you just have a mashgiach who's in tune with what's going on, and in terms of like helping out and whatnot. And I feel like something you can't teach necessarily. Both great mashgiachim, but there's certain nuances that someone gets over others. And I say this sometimes, telling a mashgiach, please do X, Y, Z task, especially in a place which has limited scope. Sometimes you have a very limited scope kitchen. Especially this place is very limited scope. There's one cooking line. It's not retail. It's close to the public. There's very little going on. So in that scenario, having a mashgiach helping out can be crucial just to keep him on his toes. Because if not, you're relying on his own intuition of just how to be in tune to things. What do we give him? We gave him a checklist of things to do. After you did your checklist, what are you doing? So I want to hear from Rabbi Nissan about the pros and cons of working mashgiachim, non-working mashgiachim, etc. And what does Tamidus mean? Tell us what does Tamidus mean to you, Rabbi Nissan?
So first of all, there's obviously having mashgiach is different from open to close, but if sleeping or is like you said, reading a newspaper, or sometimes I've had mashgiachim which were also studying and college courses, they were doing homework or studying for tests, and who knows what, is obviously in a way counterproductive. You're not really having a tmidi. So besides, obviously, for when I tell my mashgiachim, we're telling people that we have hashgacha tmidis, that means that you need to be continuously aware of what's going on. Now, it doesn't mean you have to be standing in the kitchen the entire time. I do tell them that, you can go on the side if you really finished all your tasks and you want to go learn something or do something, make a phone call. But even if you're doing that, at least every 15, 20 minutes, I want you to go back in the kitchen area and to make your rounds, see what equipment is lit and what's cooking, see if anything needs to be done. Just walk around and see if there's, even walk around through the people eating, see if there's anybody that brought outside food, whatever it is. Just go and be there and be present, and that's what you're being paid for. That's part of your job. So even if working mashgiach, which I definitely see in a way an advantage. Same time, I've seen also disadvantages of working mashgiach, and they get so caught up with that, and they have so much to do that it's hard to balance. They're maybe stuck in the front on the line making people sandwiches when there's a whole kitchen in the back, and there's could be things happening that they have no about because they're so busy up front. So it's sometimes hard to balance working mashgiach and then be getting my restaurant to get busy or his front to get busy. So generally we try to have the mashgiach be not working. That's personally our take. But at the same time, part of the thing which I check on when I'm looking at cameras, or part of the thing which I check when I come to the place, I'll walk straight into the kitchen, and if I don't see the mashgiach, wait around and see. If the guy's not showing up, then suddenly I will call him. It seems like, what were you doing? Where were you? I was already around here for like 10, 15 minutes in the kitchen. I didn't see you. So to just
the mashgiach tells you, I was just gone for 2 minutes. And you're like, I've been here for a half hour. You weren't here.
Exactly. Right. Exactly. So yeah, like one of the famous things, 5 minutes can mean many different things for different people.
This comes back to foresight.
Yeah. So that's my quick take. I really have to go now. I'm just gonna thank you for this opportunity. It was a pleasure. So
we'll do this again. We'll continue a few minutes to answer a few questions now. But listen, thank you so much for your time, and let's do it again with some other topics.
Yes, Kosher Consumers.
So I have a slightly different take to what hashgacha tmidis means.
Yeah.
There's really two different components to it. Component number one is every food service establishment, as opposed to an industrial factory, generally has things that need to be dealt with kashrus wise daily, constantly, whether it's opening in the beginning of the day, starting fires, locking things up, sealing deliveries, approving incoming ingredients that are coming and going, and not just in a very organized fashion. So for somebody to think that a restaurant or a caterer can operate without a mashgiach tamidi, without a capable shema Torah mitzvahs there, is just not possible. So the first and foremost role of a mashgiach is simply to be able to serve the needs to ensure kashrus happens. It's
I want
nothing.
to stop you over there for a second. Say I have, by us in Boston, it's Harvard Street, okay?
Yeah.
Some places it's more concentrated. It could be 16th
Yeah.
Avenue, 13th Avenue,
Yeah.
Avenue M in Flatbush, and there's a Shaw,
Yeah.
Malchis, wherever your
Yeah.
spot is, okay?
Yeah.
You get a mashgiach tamidi, which is a working mashgiach, maybe. I think it's more popular. Your neman kashrut is an
Right.
employee of the restaurant, your shemitah mitzvahs. And okay, allegiance is this and that. Or I could have a guy, and his job is to go up and down the block the whole day, take care of these 6 restaurants. And he's in and out every half hour, 45 minutes, every single one. Nonstop checking on things because he's only in there for 15 minutes each time. Is it possible there's mileage to such a system? I'm not advocating for that. It should be done. I think maybe
So again, there are mileage on the second. There's mileage on the second part. On the first part, it's not really practical. The only thing that maybe it could be done in that way has to do with opening and closing. But for other things, they need more vegetables. They need, and there are places, I know places in the world, for example, that they only have one mashgiach that's allowed to check vegetables in the city, and he goes around from one place to the next. Well, what happens when the guy got delayed? There was a bris, there was a traffic, there was whatever it was. So people coming and they want their salad, Caesar salad at 12 o'clock in the afternoon, but the mashgiach didn't get there yet. So no Caesar salad right now. It doesn't really work like that. So you have your mashgiach that opened up, but he's not authorized to do washing. You need somebody else to do that. My point is that there's things that need to happen in order to make sure that kashrus is being maintained in every establishment. And that's the main reason why kashrus agencies in the last 20, 30 years in the United States have insisted on hashgacha tamidis. It's also, I think, to a certain degree, why a lot of Hamish places don't have hashgacha tamidis, because anyway, there's a frum balabas, and he's controlling things anyway. So therefore, you don't have to lock up and seal up, because it's only the Hamish owner doing that anyway. Officially, whether that really happens or not is a different story. But that's
I have to stop you right there.
One second. So that's the point number one. The point number two is the mirsas factor. The fact that people need to know, the staff that works in an establishment, Jews, Goyim, from people, not from people, need to know that there's somebody that's going to hold them accountable to the policies. For that, a yoytze v'nichnas for sure is enough. The question is, how much of a yoytze v'nichnas? Is it more yoytze or more nichnas? Right? So if you have, like Rabbi Zibell said before, where you end up with 4 or 5 times a visit in a week to an establishment, not always, but sometimes. And I know in Boston we had that to very, very high frequency of oversight inspections, route supervisors. I used to go in myself. You go in yourself.
I can say, especially in critical times,
multiple people will go in, and then you create that mirsas anyway. So yeah. I think that having that dual system of having a good working mashgiach that's there to cover the necessities to maintain kashrus, make sure the vegetables are being checked, fires are being lit, no ingredients are coming in that should not be coming in, and no things are going out that are not sealed that are supposed to be sealed. Places are locked up, are sealed, are opened, etc., etc. All those things are happening. That's the job of the working mashgiach. That's the job of a regular mashgiach. But for a real mirsas, that's what we have the additional oversight for.
I think the additional oversight is also ties back into something. People ask, how do you vet another hashgacha? This could be a consumer question. How often does the Rav Machsher or someone working for the Rav Machsher check in on the on-site mashgiach?
Yep, 100%.
And the guy can tell you whatever he wants, but at least it's something. And if a Rav Machsher is not living in the city or whatever it is, I think that's the first thing. Does the Rav Machsher live in the city? If he does not live in the city, what's his methodology of oversight on the mashgiach? It's a crucial thing. Because it's different.
I mean, I would know one case. I didn't speak to him directly, but I was told about a certain rabbi that gives hashgacha in Eretz Yisrael, Rav in Eretz Yisrael gives hashgacha in one of the places in Europe. Supposedly he flies there himself personally every few weeks, and he goes around of all of his places, right? So that's one system, right? To say it's good enough, it's perfect. It's not. I'm not judging. I'm just putting that into perspective. But the reverse thing is where you have it worse. I filled in for mashgiach in a restaurant in Eretz Yisrael that has a certain badatz, right? A certain whatever. Good hashgacha. I don't remember if it was a number 2 or number 3 on that list. On which row? Not row number 1, but number 2 or number 3. Not somebody very far down. And somebody comes in, some mefakeach, like a route supervisor came in to check up, and he asked me, "You're Shlomi?" And I'm like, "No, I'm not Shlomi. I'm filling in for Shlomi." And then we talk for 5 minutes, and then I'm like, after we're talking and schmoozing about different things, how often do you come here? Oh, every day. Does that make sense to you?
Yeah.
You don't know I'm not Shlomi. You don't know I'm not Shlomi, but you come here every day. Yep. You convinced me.
Yeah. I think we also know places, sometimes you have a place that you find out it's under the owner's hashgacha, for better or for worse. You find places that for better or for worse is under the owner's hashgacha. So that's an easy thing for that. That's a relatively easy thing for a consumer to ask a Rav Machsher. And a lot of things I don't want to ask, because people are not comfortable. I'll tell you one thing, as a consumer who also is a kashrus professional, I realize one thing, sometimes it's uncomfortable. I make a point of asking to see the kashrus certificate, even if it's I could have spoken to Rav Machsher 10 minutes ago. And there's a place I did. I call Rav Machsher. I'm saying, this place is good for me, it's going to be Yashin and Pas Yisrael, whatever I'm looking for. Rav Machsher will tell me, yeah. I'll go in the store 10 minutes later, and I'll ask to see the kashrus certificate. I want the balabas to know, I want the ownership to know, the management to know that it's important to me as a consumer to see that kashrus
100%.
certificate.
100%.
It's important. People want to know what they can do to improve kashrus. You can do a better job than any hashgacha, because I'm going to say this, and people are going to say it's harsh. We get the kashrus we deserve. We get the kashrus we deserve. If we demand better standards, and people want to, how do I demand it? This is one way you can do it very easily. Ask to see the kashrus certificate every time. Ask the Rav Machsher question.
Ask to talk to the mashgiach.
Let's talk to the mashgiach. Most times, I think most times the mashgiach will appreciate it. They're very underappreciated people in general.
100%.
I mean, most they'll appreciate it, and it's good for kashrus. Sometimes the owner's like, "What do you want to see it for? You claim to be kosher certified?
Yep.
I want to see your kashrus certificate. I want to make sure it's current. I want to
Yeah.
say there's a mashgiach here. I want to talk to the mashgiach for 2 seconds. And you don't have a good word from the mashgiach. Thank him for his work. It serves a dual purpose. So I think that's so important. So important.
Yeah.
It also shows the mashgiachim that you better stay on top of your game, because people are going to come ask questions. Where's your meat from? From New York.
Does not know that Ashkenazim don't eat peas.
Sorry, someone asking a question?
No,
that was that. Okay. So I think consumer demand, people ask how to change something. They ask, KVH gets these questions all the time. We talked about why it doesn't say Pas Yisrael. How do I make something Pas Yisrael? Demand it from the company. Demand it from the company, write it in. They have actually a formula. I learned this recently from 2 clients. There's a formula in customer service that they have. In different industries, it works different. That for every question asked, they assume a certain amount of people, a certain percentage of people have the same issue but didn't ask it. So it's a real thing in customer service. So the more people ask something, the bigger demand you drive. When 100 people ask something, it's not 100 people. It can be 10,000 people, depending on the formula. So that's a super important thing. Consumers have a lot more power than they believe. On that end, we wanted to talk about wine. We'll talk about it briefly. Really, I think the topic of wine, I have someone in mind to talk with who has dealt extensively in hashgacha and wine, has been around the world, South America, Africa, or South Africa,
Europe, Israel.
Europe, Israel. He's seen wineries all over. I think you know who I'm talking about, Zalman. I think one day maybe we'll get him on. We'll get him on to talk about the kashrus of wine from every standard, from anything OU to any chassidish hashgacha and whatnot. He has an insane amount of experience in wine. I don't know the moves, but definitely a vast experience in wine. I think we'll do such a thing. But I'll say this in food service: ask to see the certification. Ask to talk to the mashgiach. You'll get a feel for what's going on over there. And if you really have the guts, call the Rav Moshe. You can definitely call me. I always tell people actually WhatsApp and text are the best way to get a hold of me. If you call our hot, we try to answer the phone all the time, but we don't have a dedicated person answering phones. And it's one day we will. We try to have an RC's answer, the rabbinical coordinator in charge of those accounts, answer those questions so you can get the real details about what's going on in the account. And to so actually, they may have some interesting. They put the mashgiach or the mefakech's phone number on the certificate. Is that correct?
Yeah, most rabbanuts, only the rabbanut, usually not, but usually don't have it. Some do, but most don't. They have on the certificate. Again, it's not a requirement. Not everybody does it, but many people, what they have is they have the mashgiach and the mefakech, the supervisor, their cell phone number on the certificate. Correct.
There's pros and cons, but I definitely see more pros to that. You can get a feel. You start asking the guy questions. What's going on? And the guy's like, I don't know. You say, okay, thank you for your help. Or the guy can give you, I come back to that letter that I received from Balbosta here in Boston. It was literally, my Rav said I should ask you these 6 bullet points. It was beautiful. It was really a beautiful thing. And it's so rare. I wish we would get more of that. I wish we would, not just as this product policy store, which is a great question, but a question like that. You have your certified place open on Shabbos. How do you deal with Bishul Yisrael? How do you deal with Ma'aseh Shabbos? There's so much to ask on that. You know what? One of the reasons I appreciate it so much, how hard I worked on that. I'll share one anecdote. I asked a mentor of mine who works for a national agency, and he says to me, I think I told you this, Zalman. He says to me, after I went through with him, must have been a half hour on the phone. I went through how we're going to do this. L'tachlis aheder with a place that's open on Shabbos. Granted, it's open on Shabbos. But how can we do it aside from that? Not keeping going on Shabbos. Sealing up things. Produce is sealed up. Unchecked produce is sealed up over there. Cameras and that's one thing that I think what we started doing over here. Produce gets sealed up. Unchecked produce gets sealed up, even when a mashgiach is not active. When a mashgiach is not actively busy with the produce. And he says to me, Moshe, what do you need this headache for? He said, to sit in a Jewish metropolis surrounded by kosher certified restaurants, and you ask me in Boston, what do I need this headache for? And my community needs me to have this headache. So, I appreciate when someone asks me all the hard work that went into it.
Yeah.
So, 2 seconds on wine, okay? Or 2 minutes.
So
on wine.
In a nutshell, wine is the most complicated kosher item that exists for a simple reason. Most wine is not outside of Israel. Most wine is made in non-Jewish facilities or in some kind of partnership, some kind of relationship with a non-Jewish facility. And many times, even if it is a dedicated Jewish facility, which there are some, they still outsource some of the work, meaning the initial
There are very
crush.
few.
And there are very few, but every single one of them, to the best of my knowledge, does some of the work outside. They do the first crush outside. They pasteurize outside. They do bottling outside. They do something. They send barrels outside for storage in the meantime. There's all kinds of different things that it doesn't just stay in one place. And the second you're dealing with a non-Jewish connection with wine, it's what's called matar yeina shel nachri, and not always, but you're trying to get out of it being matar yeina shel nachri, and you get into many intricate details and sometimes conflicting positions in the Rishonim and the Achronim on how to resolve that issue. It's very hard to do. That's number one. Number two is with 1 millisecond, you mess everything up. You leave something on. I once was involved.
Relying on the diets. Yeah.
I was once involved with the wine production with something, and a mashgiach on one tank, on wine tanks, you can have multiple sealing opening points. And a mashgiach sealed 15 and forgot the 16th, right? On one tank. Well, that tank was not approved by the hashgachas, the main hashgachas. One hashgacha did approve it, right? But
Can I jump in on that? You give that example. I was the head mashgiach on a grape juice production for actually more than one hashgacha. And we found problems, and we found that not only can you control everything from the computer at that tank or at that valve or at that,
any computer in the facility.
Any computer in the facility was able to control. Oh my gosh, what are we going to do? And we went around securing this and securing that. My replacement the following year, I couldn't do it due to my other responsibility. I couldn't follow up with it, but I set it up with another person I knew who had extensive experience in another person that we know who had extensive experience in grape juice. And I set him up to be the head mashgiach there. And he goes there and he found a problem that I didn't find. Not only can they control it from any computer in the facility
Remotely.
tablets they can control it from. And
Yeah.
not only tablets, they can control it from their home computer by logging in.
Yeah.
How do you deal with such things? Do you log it in, require a new password, a secondary password? These are complexities that Rav Moshe has to be on top of. You think you found all the problems, and then someone else comes along and finds another problem. So
100%.
Why I'm from the public community. I'm sure he heard it from other people. People think that they're the biggest expert and they're indispensable. Cemeteries are full of indispensable people. So, as they say, when you're the biggest expert in the room, you better find a new room to be in.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I'm gonna give one last call for questions. I'll give it 30 seconds if anyone wants to ask a question. Okay, I'm gonna wrap now. Everyone a Kosher Sameach, and I'm really hoping that with different, obviously I would love to do with Reb Zalman and this and again different expertises and whatnot, but maybe we'll bring on some other Kashrus experts. If you want to talk about wine, we'll talk about wine. We'll do a special one on cheese. We can talk for 2 hours about food service and how people can really nail down the Kashrus on restaurants. So any questions, feel free to email us, and I'm happy to put people in touch with other experts in the field. If I'm not the expert on that and I need more help, I'm happy to. Reb Zalman is my resident Israeli expert, so for private information, definitely send the questions to Reb Zalman. With that, I wish everyone a Chag Kosher V'Sameach. Really thank you for joining and keep asking questions. It's very much appreciated by everyone in the Kashrus field. A good yontif.
Oh, thank you, Moshe. Good yom tov.